All right, welcome to our webinar today. Let's give people a little bit of time to log on and get situated. Numbers are rising, and so we're just going to wait a couple of minutes until we get started. If you have any questions or any notes for us, you're welcome to put it in the chat to let us know if you have specific questions or anything. In general, if you have questions for the presenters, we encourage you to put them in the Q&A box of Zoom so that we can go through them after the presentation. All right, it seems numbers are slowing down. So let's get started. In interest of time, I really want to make sure that we respect your time today. My name is Uli Klenke. I'm the director of OIT Resilience Programs, and I'm so excited to welcome you to today's Mental Health and Well-Being series for biomedical researchers. Our topic today is going to be healthy rest as a stepping stone to productivity and well-being. This is a follow-up to last month's part 1 of the series about burnout in biomedical researchers. And I'm looking forward to learning today tools and skills that will help me to be more productive and well by actually doing healthy rest. And there are so many different kinds, and I'm excited to learn about it. I do want to invite you to our 2 other parts of this particular series. Next month, we're going to learn about the epidemic of loneliness and its impact on researchers and their science. And then our last session is going to be how do we support each other in being well? And we're going to have a panel discussion for that one. And that's going to happen in June. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to 2 of our OIT Wellbeing advisors, Dr. Erica Shirley and Regina Morales, who are going to talk to us today about healthy rest as a stepping stone to productivity and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Uli. So I'm so happy today to talk to you about healthy rest as a stepping stone to productivity and well-being with my colleague, Regina Morales. As Uli mentioned, the first talk in the series, Lori McNulty and Annie Shiner talked about burnout among biomedical researchers. And they spoke about preventing burnout and responding to burnout. And some of the interventions mentioned included finding time to engage in self-care activities that cultivate more of a work-life balance, which is all associated with healthy rest. And so today's talk will take a deeper dive into healthy rest, its definition, benefits of healthy rest, risk factors associated with sacrificing rest, barriers to integrating healthy rest into your life, and how you might respond to those barriers such that you're better able to prioritize healthy rest. Trying to get to the next slide. I'm going to stop share a moment and come back on. For some reason it's stuck as I try to get to the next slide.
Maybe you need to stop sharing one more time.
Okay.
Okay, I have your slides open. I can try if that works for me.
Okay, thank you. So I should stop share.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry for that interruption. So healthy rest is a time to detach and take a break from the pressures and demands of work and life's obligations and duties. It's a time that allows for relaxation and recovery from stress, and it allows for the restoration of energy and renewal of strength. And often it might be thought of as just a reward for work or a response to feeling tired and depleted. However, it serves our ability to sustain attention, focus, creativity, learning, and problem solving while we are working. It's an important prevention of job burnout and physical illness. It's also broad in scope, which we're hoping to emphasize today in our talk. So often we may think of rest as the more passive forms of rest, such as sleeping and napping. However, rest is also active, including goal-oriented and directed activities, which we'll talk more about in detail in a bit. Healthy rest is also the most effective and beneficial if integrated into a regular routine, as opposed to only on occasion. So that's not to mean that, that's not to add stress or pressure of having to add something else to what's likely an already busy routine. However, it's meant to emphasize that it's important to prioritize rest into a regular routine. And there are always ways to rest that are easily accessible and realistic additions to your routine. So for example, while an occasional vacation is certainly a benefit, revitalizing the mind and body, creating distance and from job-related stress, studies have found that people report that these benefits may fade within weeks. And so this further emphasizes the need to incorporate rest as a routine. Next slide. So there are many benefits to rest, to healthy rest. So when we take breaks from work to engage in activities that are not work-related, that promote rest, stress is relieved, and often the symptoms of stress are relieved. So you might find that you feel more a sense of calm and relaxation internally. You also might find that your body is reacting in a positive way. So your body might feel more regulated. Your heartbeat might be more regulated. You may feel less tense. And so we know that it can relieve the mental stress, and we can access the benefit of what it feels like to de-stress. It also supports engagement in enjoyable activities. So as I was saying before, it's broad in scope. It's not just sleeping and napping. It allows us to engage in activities that help to give us a sense of restoration and renewal and joy. And in addition to that, when we do engage in enjoyable activities, not only are we cultivating a sense of joy and relaxation, but also a sense of mastery and accomplishment that's different from what we may experience when we're working. So it's a sense of engaging in something that brings you happiness and joy, while also bringing a sense of mastery and accomplishment without the constraints of work, without the stress of work. And as I said before, it cultivates feelings of restoration and renewal. Next slide. So as I was saying, it's not only a reward for working hard or work or a break from work. Anecdotally, I think a lot of people have experienced how rest can be a benefit to productivity, and there's research to support that. So rest helps us to mentally replay recently learned skills without conscious effort. So when we're working on a task or focused on a skill or learning a skill, when we step away, when we take a break, when we do something else, that when we're not focusing on work, our brain is actually continuing to learn that skill. And we often need those moments of rest to actually sustain the learning and to sharpen our ability to learn new skills, especially. It helps us make sense of recently acquired knowledge. So often when we're faced with having to learn something new or something challenging, taking breaks, engaging in rest can help to help us sharpen and to strengthen the knowledge and to help us make more sense of the knowledge that we've recently learned. It helps us problem solve during resting. And this may be something that people have experienced on their own, especially. So epiphanies or aha moments. You may be faced with a challenge at work, in your research group, in your lab, etc., a problem with the science, for example, and it's really hard to figure it out as you are focused on the problem or the task at hand. But if you step away, take a break, engage in something completely, in an activity that may bring you joy and something completely different than work, you may have found that all of a sudden you have an aha moment or an epiphany about how to approach the problem. It's also necessary for replenishing our attention, focus, and motivation upon return to work. So people often talk about when going on vacation, feeling much more refreshed. And as we said before, we don't only have to feel that way when going on an occasional vacation, but it can be more of an everyday practice. Rest can be more of an everyday practice that helps us to renew and replenish and sharpen our ability to attend and to focus and be while we're at work. It sustains higher levels of productivity and creativity while working. So studies that have researched athletes and also artists have noticed that many exceptional artists and athletes often organically include moments of recovery, breaks, rest, balanced with their focus on their work, focus on their practice. Also, interestingly, a study that followed thriving scientists, actually, for over 20 years, it was a longitudinal study done some years ago, but we thought it was important to include this, revealed that there were shared attitudes and practices that prioritize a balance of work, rest, and recreation among all of the scientists who were considered thriving and successful. And this was at every stage of their career. So not just their more senior stages of career when perhaps they had a lot of support to be able to take more breaks, but even at the early stages of their career, researchers noticed a shared practice and attitude of prioritizing the balance of work, rest, and recreation. Next slide. Now, there is a downside to sacrificing rest. We understand that it can be hard to prioritize rest, certainly in not only the larger culture, but often in the culture of science, where we're often having to think about outcomes and productivity. However, what we do know is that there are risks associated with insufficient rest. So people may experience poor memory and concentration, difficulty sleeping, chronic fatigue. So not just feeling tired 1 or 2 days out of the week, but an ongoing sense of exhaustion and fatigue. Burnout, as Annie and Lori talked about in the first lecture, anxiety and depression. So oftentimes, most people can manage the stressors of everyday life. However, when we deprive ourselves of healthy rest, we're often less able to cope. Our coping skills become dulled, so to speak, and people may find themselves becoming more anxious and depressed, even in response to what may be considered everyday life's challenges. And then there are, of course, physical health challenges that are well researched. And as Annie and Lori said about burnout, it's a progressive process. Oftentimes when we're depriving ourselves of healthy rest, or when we're not able to get healthy rest, we may not notice these kinds of signs until later. We may be able to sort of continue to work and to continue to do for a while. However, we begin to feel these sorts of risks. Next slide. So as I was saying before, healthy rest has a broad scope. And in addition to sleep and napping and vacation, there are actually things that we can do in our everyday lives to incorporate healthy rest into our schedules. And some of you who've been to OIT seminars or workshops may have seen this holistic self-care model created by one of the previous well-being advisors. But healthy rest fits perfectly, healthy active rest fits really perfectly into the 4 quadrants. So we know that holistic health and self-care requires paying attention to physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And healthy rest actually requires us to think about how we can incorporate rest into all four of those quadrants. So with the body, we think about physical rest, the mind's associated to mental rest, the heart, social rest, and the spirit, spiritual rest. And Regina will go into more detail about what we mean by that. Next
Thank
slide.
you, Eric. But let's go ahead and do a deeper dive into the 4 components of active rest that we've been talking about, and talk about some specific strategies or techniques for each of them. Let's start by talking about physical rest. So physical rest is an intentional form of rest where you use the body's basic processes, such as breathing, to calm and restore yourself. We know that physical rest increases relaxation, it sharpens concentration, it's easy to learn, it improves with practice, so anything habitual helps, and it promotes fun while engaging in everyday tasks. Next, we'll talk about some examples of physical rest. So let's review some specific techniques that you can build into your day. Some of them may take a few seconds, and some of them may take up to 15 minutes, depending on how much time you have available. Some of you have probably learned a lot about deep breathing. And so you may be familiar with different breathing exercises. Let's talk about one particular exercise that I think is very easy to learn and very helpful, and it's called box breathing. And basically, you imagine that you're breathing around a box or a square. So first, you breathe in, counting to 4 slowly. You feel the air entering your lungs. Second, you hold your breath for 4 seconds. You try to avoid inhaling or exhaling for 4 seconds. Third, you slowly exhale out your mouth for 4 seconds. And then the fourth, or the last part of the box, you hold your breath for 4 seconds. And you go ahead and repeat this as often as necessary to bring your body into a greater sense of calm. Mountain pose is something that if you've ever taken a yoga class, you've probably experienced or practiced mountain pose. It's a very common yoga practice, and it's all about alignment. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit about how we do it, and also just mention that this is something that you can do in the elevator, you can do when you're talking to people, and they may not even notice. So to practice mountain pose, you stand with your feet slightly apart and think about stacking your ankles, your knees, your hips, and your shoulders in an imaginary straight line. So you're imagining that there's a line going from the floor through your body and up to the ceiling or to the sky. And that is it. That's mountain pose. It's a way of restoring our posture and having ourselves centered physically. Another pose that you may want to try is gravity pose. So for this one, you lie flat on the floor. Join your hands by lacing your fingers behind your head. You cross your legs at the ankle and raise your feet up from the ground. Then you lower your feet and sense your body sinking back into the ground. Take some deep breaths and feel gravity pulling your body down into the ground, and feel how your back, your legs, and your neck feel on the floor. Another strategy for physical rest is taking some quick naps. And helpful naps can be as short as 5 minutes. They can make you feel rested and mentally sharp, improve learning and memory. And if you take them early in the afternoon, they can increase work productivity. Then there's a strategy known as the unnap. So for this, you close your eyes and you put your hands over your eyes as you close them. Feel the motion of your eyeballs. Sense the muscle tension and the motion in your left eye. Is there more tension in the left corner of the eye, the middle, the right? Compare it to the muscle tension in the other eye. If you find doing this with the eyeballs as difficult as I did, try it with your eyebrows. The basic and main idea with this is that by paying attention to one specific muscle, it usually relaxes muscles elsewhere in the body. Next. So let's talk about mental rest. Mental rest is an intentional concentration on something beyond your body, such as visual images, sounds, or mental imagery. We know that mental rest regulates blood pressure, heart rate, and body temperature. It improves mood, anxiety, and creativity. A really helpful component towards achieving greater mental rest is therapy. Therapy can help with processing your thoughts and your feelings, and externalizing them and putting them, expressing them to somebody else, so that you have better mastery over whatever it is that is occupying or preoccupying you. Next, we'll talk about some examples of mental rest. So one example is visualization. So visualization would be focusing on a simple and calming word, such as peace or calm. Hear the word in your head. Concentrate on the word for 2 or 3 minutes. And as you do that, see if you can let other thoughts come and go. You don't have to force anything. You don't have to force other thoughts to go away. You just imagine that they're like clouds and they're coming and going. You can do the same visualization using a calming image. For example, imagine a lake or clouds, or imagine that you're traveling to a natural place that you'd like to visit. When you've arrived there, go on the most delightful hike that you can imagine, and try to include as much sensory detail as possible. Another example of mental rest is focusing the eye. Focusing the eye. You focus on one small natural element, such as a leaf or a branch outside the window, or the leaf of a plant on your desk. You notice with as much detail as possible the color of the leaf, its shape, its size. See how much you can notice about it. And as you concentrate on the leaf, allow thoughts of anything other than the leaf to come and go. An additional technique that you might want to try. This one is, I think, sounds like it would be so much fun, because you can do it and no one will know you're doing it. But it's walking to music that you select, tunes that you select to imagine. So imagine or select 2 melodies that you really like. One is fast and one is slow. Now imagine that you're hearing it in your head for 20 seconds or more. Walk to the beat of the fast song. This could be when you're walking in the hallway or you're walking to get your lunch. Walk to the beat of that fast song and match the rhythm and speed of the song with your walk. Then match your walk to the music of the slow song. Again, this is something that you can do as you're going about your day. Erica mentioned deep play. I don't know that we've named it deep play yet, but it's that idea of using hobbies and crafts and sports and things that you truly, deeply enjoy, and that when you're doing these activities, you are deeply and only in the present moment. You're doing them. This ability to engage in tasks that are really enjoyable and give us a sense of mastery and achievement are extremely restful. And that's our last example of mental rest. Next, we'll talk about social rest. Social rest is social connectedness and support through various interactions with family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. We know that social rest manages the biological stress response. It calms our body. We know that it provides important health benefits, as we'll know in the next conversation that we're going to have. We'll be talking about the epidemic of loneliness. So we know that social rest is very important to our health, our physical health and mental health. Social rest provides personal fun and meaning. And as one person noted, small gestures have deep roots. So even short moments of interaction are of significant benefit. Let's talk about some examples of social rest. So again, we have different levels of social connection. Some are our closest circle and some are in widening circles, less close to us, but they're all important. So special connections are the people that you call in moments of need. Reconnecting with folks that maybe because of work, because of busyness, it's you may not have talked to in a while, but they're people that you know are in your corner. That's an important example of how to stay connected and how to give yourself some of that we need, in terms of being in community. In-person interactions with a neighbor or a coworker that you'd like to know better. Brief, regular contact with people that you enjoy. Taking a walk with friends or colleagues. Being outside, maybe walking to a park, incorporating exercise along with friendship or with social rest. And joining recreational clubs and teams are all really important. And lastly, we'll talk about spiritual rest as one of our quadrants. Margareta Asp was a researcher on rest. She summarized research participants' descriptions of spiritual rest in this way. She often heard these reflections. Spiritual rest is a time to reflect on earlier experiences and become more integrated and whole as a person. In silence, you meet yourself, and it can be hard, but it is necessary. Spiritual rest is that connection with something greater than ourselves. For some people, it's nature. For others, it's the universe, the cosmos, and for others, it's a higher power. We know that spiritual rest decreases anxiety and promotes better health overall. It increases social connection, especially when shared in community. And for some examples of spiritual rest, again, anything that we use to bring awareness to an everyday activity, to be in that present moment, aware that we're not in the past or in the future, provides spiritual rest for us. Meditation or prayer, depending on your beliefs and practices. And some of these practices can include walking meditation, focusing on your breath, and guided imagery. Let's go over each of these and see if it helps to kind of understand them a little bit more. So walking meditation. This involves noticing the components of each movement as you take a step. So very purposefully paying attention while very, very slowly doing a series of actions that you normally do automatically. So to do walking meditation, you very slowly want to notice how you lift one foot, the moving of that foot a bit forward of where you're standing, the placement of the foot on the floor heel first, the shifting of the weight of the body onto the forward leg as the back lifts. So going through that motion and really noticing every step that goes into walking is walking meditation. Focusing on your breath. And a way to do this, you close your eyes and you focus on your breathing. As you inhale, think about your lungs inflating, your ribs expanding, and the breath moving through your nasal passages. As you exhale, think about your lungs deflating and the breath rushing out of your nasal passages. Again, you're noticing that when we do all of these exercises, they help us become aware of how we are in this moment now. And lastly, there's guided imagery, which is the use of words and music to evoke positive imaginary scenarios that help us feel calm or give us a sense of well-being. You may have experienced some of these guided imagery exercises. For example, you're sitting by the side of a lake, and you're feeling the sun on your face and you're feeling the grass under your feet. And this guided imagery walks you through an entire visualization where you're experiencing these things, this moment. Next, we'll talk a little bit about passive rest, sleeping and napping. We know that sleep and naps enhanced the ability to learn, to memorize, to make logical decisions and choices. It recalibrates our emotional brain circuits so that we can feel more calm. And we know that insufficient sleep correlates with physical and mental health challenges. Next, one question that often comes up: how much sleep do I actually need? That can be a very personal or individualized question, but to have a sense of how much sleep you need, try asking yourself these questions. After waking up in the morning, could you fall right back to sleep at 10 or 11? Can you function optimally without caffeine before noon? If you didn't set an alarm, would you sleep past your wake-up time? The answers to those questions can give you some indication about whether or not your ideal you're sleeping your ideal number of hours of sleep. Next, we'll talk about healthy sleep habits or good sleep hygiene. So before bed, taking a hot bath, and again, maybe not scalding, but really hot, lowers your core body temperature, which is a circadian sleep signal. It actually triggers the sleep response or sleep pressure. Avoiding screens. Screens are often, as many know, mimicking daylight. So our brains get confused. And another really great suggestion is to set up time to wind down before your bedtime. And have it, if possible, always be the same time in which you're relaxing, you're getting off of screens, you're doing whatever your usual routine is before you go to bed. There's also a recommendation from sleep experts to stop caffeine consumption 10 to 14 hours prior to bedtime. And to set fixed times to sleep and to wake, and have those be the same sleep and wake times as in the weekends. This is especially important if you're having trouble sleeping during the week. To remove electronic devices from the bedroom. And if you need them or you're using them as alarms, to put them on airplane mode so that you're not woken up by lights or by pinging during the night. And this one I think is really important too. If you can't sleep for whatever reason, you're having trouble sleeping, don't just stay in bed. Get out of bed, go sit somewhere comfy, read or relax, hopefully not on a screen, and then come back to bed when you're feeling sleepy. The reason for this is because we want your brain to associate being in bed with feeling sleepy. We don't want your brain to learn that you spent hours in bed tossing and turning because you're awake and you're having trouble sleeping. So, thank you.
Thanks, Regina.
Erica will pick up.
Yes, thanks, Regina. So oftentimes when it comes to benefits to our health, we may know what we need to do and maybe even how to do it to some extent. However, we still experience challenges, maybe challenges to motivation or more complex psychological challenges that may get in the way or undermine our ability to incorporate healthy rest. So these are a few that come to mind for us. The first two have to do with unhealthy coping mechanisms. And so, for example, thinking about ways to escape or numb are not necessarily ways to engage in healthy rest. And so downtime that undermines the quality and benefit of healthy rest, such as large amounts of screen time, and or especially the use of multiple screens. So of course, we all have our favorite TV shows. I personally love films. So I think that that's an important downtime that can be fun and is certainly acceptable to do. But you might want to think about the time that you're spending watching TV. Is it excessive? And especially you might want to think about, are you kind of multitasking while watching TV? Are you not only watching TV, but you're scrolling on your phone? And what we know is that the use of multiple screens at once can be quite overstimulating to the brain, kind of undermining the quality and benefit of healthy rest. Also, to excessive use or abuse of substances to relax and unwind. Again, these might be habits that we might do to numb or to escape, but they undermine the quality of healthy rest. They undermine the renewal and restoration that often our bodies and brains need when we are resting. and when we need to rest, etc. And then in addition to relatively unhealthy coping mechanisms, there are also cultural messages that promote working all the time, for example, while sacrificing balance and rest. And this can be complicated because we are very influenced by the larger culture, not only the larger culture, but also our work cultures, our work systems, our research groups, etc. And there may be overt or even covert messages about the relationship to work that may undermine prioritizing balance and rest. And these can be quite difficult to navigate because oftentimes they can feel as though they're the most out of our control. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in the presentation. And then there also are individual stories that we tell ourselves, or narratives and beliefs and thoughts that impact how we feel. And then, of course, how we then engage, how we respond to those thoughts and feelings. And oftentimes these are stories that we tell ourselves about work that can lead to overwork and the sacrificing of self-care and rest, or sometimes can lead to overwhelm that can then lead to feeling rather detached as opposed to resting. So there's a difference between being resting and taking time, taking a break versus being shut down. And so sometimes we might have thoughts about work that tend to relate to overworking essentially. So we may, we'll get to those in a minute about some of the thoughts that we may have that may lead to overwork. And then sometimes we may overwork and feel overwhelmed in such a way that that leads us to feel shut down, such that we're not able to function as we normally would. And that's not rest. That is feeling shut down and likely a risk factor of depression. Next slide. So more on thoughts and emotions. If you've ever been to an OITE well-being seminar or workshop, you may have seen this triangle before, but I think it's a really important model. It's a really important foundation, a way to understand how our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are interrelated. So as I was saying before, we may have narratives, stories, thoughts that are associated with how we engage in our work, what we think about our work. And those messages can come from the larger culture. They can come from our own work environments. They can even come from our own histories, how our families modeled engaging in work and work-life balance, etc. That may lead to emotions that may be rather uncomfortable and unsettling. So for example, anxiety. So we may feel anxiety about actually prioritizing ourselves, prioritizing our wellness and our rest. It may lead to a feeling of shame or guilt, where we may think that we're not deserving of rest. You know, if rest is to only be a reward, if that's how we think about rest, then that may lead to us working, sacrificing our psyche's need and our body's need for rest. And so all of this can lead to either, as I said, overworking to the point of burnout at times, or becoming overwhelmed to the point where you are shut down and you're not resting, but you're having trouble functioning altogether. Next slide. So here's some examples of how narratives and stories that we may tell ourselves might affect or undermine our ability to take healthy rest. So cognitive distortions, which you may have heard about, are habitual ways that our mind convinces us of something not supported by facts, often negative and automatic. So for example, studying or working without taking breaks means I'll get more done. Now this may seem like a benign thought, or maybe it's even automatic in that we're not truly conscious of it. But if you think of this as a pattern, then you might realize that continuing to think this way may lead you to then not prioritize or even think about taking breaks, because you're associating breaks with slow productivity. I can't take vacation because there is still work to be done. So I think, you know, many people, of course, have long-term goals. If you're in graduate school, If you are working in a research group and you're working on a grant, for example, working on a manuscript, the journey can be relatively long. And sometimes we can then sacrifice our ability to rest, right? So I won't rest, I won't take a break, I won't take vacation until the work is done. Treating rest as though it's a reward as opposed to a necessity or as opposed to a need in order to balance work and life. And then there are work culture messages, right? So I talked about cultural messages at large. So some of the cultural messages at large that I have been hearing about are, for example, hustle culture, for example. So working all the time, working leading to productivity and success, sacrificing your ability to take breaks and to enter rest. I've heard the saying, I'll sleep when I'm dead, which is quite, morbid, but I've heard people say that before, where the idea that I will have to work and produce and really sacrifice my ability to take breaks and to rest. And sometimes this may not just come from within, but we may feel it in a way or notice it or observe it within our work culture, whether it be our research group culture or in other spaces. The notion that real scientists don't take vacation, right? That science is 24/7 and that science has to be the priority all the time while we sacrifice our own rest, taking breaks. The less sleep, the more productive one will be. So again, the idea that if I sacrifice my need for rest, then somehow I will be more productive. And then rest is the opposite of productivity. So not looking at it as not looking at rest as complementary to productivity, but looking at it as its opposite. And so if you are hyper-focused on productivity and the outcome of your work, then that might lead you to think that rest is not valuable. And I'm hoping that some of the research that we talked about prior in the talk, lets you know that it's not just about taking a break to feel better. It actually is quite necessary for our ability to sustain and our ability to not burn out when it comes to work and achievement and productivity. Next slide. So how might we respond to some of these psychological challenges? So self-awareness is often the first step when we want to make any changes in our lives. And that also pertains to thinking about creating a healthy rest plan or thinking about prioritizing rest more. So there are various ways to become more self-aware. One is journaling or reflecting on your thoughts, emotions, and behavioral patterns that may undermine healthy rest practices. So that would be you're shifting from your thinking self to your observer self. Some people may be familiar with the term metacognition, so thinking about thinking. Taking account of the downside. So once you become more aware of the thoughts and the emotions and then the behaviors that come of that, once you become more aware of the patterns, you may take account then of the downside of the pattern. And it's important to take account of the downside with curiosity and compassion as opposed to judgment. Oftentimes when we judge ourselves for something that's not so healthy or that's not benefiting us, it can actually make matters worse, so to speak. And we can sort of repress and suppress as opposed to accepting that this is the current reality. However, there is the possibility for change and growth. So taking account of the downside of the pattern with curiosity and compassion with ourselves. Thinking about perhaps what are the costs to your mental, physical, and spiritual health in addition to your values, right? So maybe thinking about what do I value? How do I value my health? How do I value other aspects of myself outside of my identity at work, outside of my identity, my professional identity? And then measuring your motivation to make changes. This is something that psychotherapists, mental health providers often do with clients, sort of in the beginning of a treatment relationship. whether it's direct or kind of indirect, but you're, thinking about how motivated am I to make a change, because that will obviously have an impact on then how you're able to engage in a change process, or your ability to engage in a change process. Next slide. And then once you've become more self-aware of your patterns, more self-aware of the downside, perhaps, of sacrificing healthy rest, you can then start to respond to that. So you might think about starting small, using accessible, healthy rest practices. Regina gave she gave a big menu of various healthy rest practices. And I'm hoping that something that you may have noticed that they all share is that they can be brief. So a little can go a long way, especially if you practice it more on a daily basis. And they're free, so you don't have to always, spend a lot of money in order to benefit your health. And you want to take account of how you feel during and after the practices, because even though we talked about the researched benefits of healthy rest, probably the best measure is you, and how you feel, before you rest and after you rest, before you engage in the practices and after the practices and during. Another way to respond to psychological challenges when we're trying to start something new is, given that our thoughts, emotions, and behavioral patterns are pretty well-worn modes of operating, and oftentimes they're automatic, oftentimes they're unconscious, so change may feel risky or uncomfortable. So when I refer to healthy risk-taking, I certainly don't mean risking something that's going to do you harm, but I mean the feeling that this may feel uncomfortable because of the feelings that we talked about earlier, right? The idea of actually prioritizing rest or balancing rest with work may at first feel as though you're sacrificing work. And so that may take some practice, that may take some processing and working through. And so initially it may feel quite risky to engage in new activities, even though they are for your health. And it's to be expected. And sometimes difficult, uncomfortable, unsettling feelings will often lead us to sort of to a stop sign, where we become so focused on soothing the discomfort that we lose sight on the bigger picture. And so it's important to remain aware of your feelings, to engage in emotion regulation practices. So just because something is uncomfortable doesn't mean it needs to be stopped per se, but there might be ways to help yourself regulate and soothe anxiety, fear, etc., and moving forward one step at a time. Next slide. And then enlisting support. I once heard a psychologist say a very simple phrase, but it's powerful: we live life together. And so social connectedness is such an organic part of who we are. We are wired. We're wired to be connected. We're wired to attach. And so connection can often be, and support, social support can really be a powerful way to help us to start a new practice. So connection with others who engage in healthy rest practices, accountability partners can be really helpful. Maybe there's someone that maybe a research group, peer, a colleague, etc., or a neighbor who is also maybe on the same page about wanting to incorporate rest and wanting to prioritize rest more. Several workshops, so OITE offers so many workshops and seminars that promote well-being. And typically within all of those workshops, it may be about different content, but typically there's likely something that emphasizes self-care and emphasizes perhaps a lot of the activities that we've talked about today. There are a lot of self-help books. Becoming a Resilient Scientist series talks about well-being and resilience, and talks about, resilience not meaning working doggedly or working through challenge in such a way where you're not taking care of yourself. And so resting and prioritizing rest is an important way of taking care of yourself. And then therapy. Therapy is a way it's a deeper exploration of the patterns that undermine healthy rest practices and well-being in general. And it offers insight and strategies to help shift self-sabotaging patterns. And so, it can be done in addition to all of the things that we talked about previously. But as I said before, oftentimes what may get in the way of healthy rest are these well-worn patterns. And so sometimes therapy can help us really gain some insight into what may be underlying the patterns. And oftentimes gaining insight can actually be quite grounding in and of itself. Therapy is also a special relationship. So it's not a friend, it's not a family member, it's not a mentor, not a supervisor. It's a special relationship in that it's a relationship with someone who is devoted to help you just as you are. You don't have to think about, what do I need to do to maintain the relationship? What do I need to do to accommodate the other person necessarily? This is a relationship where you can come as you are, so to speak, and know that the person that you're working with is focused on you being yourself, your authentic self, and helping you grow, helping you strengthen who you are. So starting a healthy rest practice. So sometimes the most difficult or challenging part about getting started are some of the psychological challenges that I just talked about. Once you may sort of have started working through those, you might think about other actions that may help you start a healthy rest practice. So individually, you may make a value-based decisions about schedule and routine for you and or your research group. So you might think about taking an account, for example, of your daily task and thinking about what's meaningful, what's enjoyable, how might I emphasize that, how might I capitalize on that, while increasing the efficiency of tasks that are maybe less fulfilling but necessary. Of course, we all have chores and tasks, especially work tasks that we have to do, but they may not be as meaningful and enjoyable, but nonetheless, they are necessary. And so thinking about how might I become a bit more efficient on those tasks so that I can have more room to engage in activities and tasks that are more meaningful and enjoyable. Starting with small, realistic shifts and additions to your schedule, as I said before. Sometimes when we think about changing, I know, for example, me, if I'm thinking about changing something or wanting to create a healthy habit, I think I sometimes think a little bit too far in terms of, I'll wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning and do an hour of exercise, knowing that that's realistic for some people, but at least for me, that's probably a bit more than I can chew right now. Maybe I could work up to that. But nonetheless, I know that that may then turn into an all or nothing, right? So if it's something that's unrealistic or kind of too big, then that may lead to you stopping. And then enlisting support, as we talked about before, social support and therapy. I'll also add that in addition to you as an individual, if you are in a position where you can influence the culture of your research group, whether you're a supervisor or a PI, I think that this is something to think about in terms of your whole research group culture. The things that you may be thinking about in addition to the science. How might we cultivate a culture of work-life balance? How might we cultivate a culture of prioritizing rest just as we prioritize the science and the work? And there may be little things you can do. I'm thinking about a PI that was in a discussion group that I was facilitating at the last RRS seminar, the Raising a Resilient Scientist seminar. And he talked about, what he did during the orientation of his lab and his research group. And he included, community. He included fellowship, outside of the research group, going out to lunch, going for coffee. It doesn't have to be something big, but maybe thinking about, how am I cultivating a culture in the research group of prioritizing healthy rest? And maybe how am I not cultivating that culture? It doesn't have to be intentional, but again, we all have our relationship to work that sometimes can undermine healthy rest.
So key takeaways as we think about everything that we've been talking about this afternoon. This is a list of a guideline that Ariana Huffington developed with sleep and rest experts after she had a very significant experience with her own burnout. And so it reflects some of the takeaways of and summarizes some of the things we've talked about today. So take rest seriously, schedule breaks regularly, and plan rest into your day and into your week and into your year. Focus, working intensively for 90 to 120-minute periods, and then taking a break and planning breaks in the middle. Layer work and rest. Plan for both work and plan for rest, and do them both deliberately. Get an early start. So see, how can you do the bulk of your most thinking intensive work early in the morning and work very intensively during that time. Detach from work, stopping work at a specific time, detaching from work on the weekends, taking a week off every season, practicing deep play. We talked about deep play as hobbies and sports and activities that really call your whole being and are motivating for you. Get plenty of physical activity and exercise, and get plenty of sleep. Next. So as you consider starting a healthy rest plan, we have some ideas or some quotes that maybe, hopefully, will jumpstart your practice. Science historian and rest expert Alex Sujong Kim Pang says, rest is not work's adversary. Rest is work's partner. They complement and complete each other. And Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh says, it's very important that we relearn the art of resting and relaxing. Not only does it help prevent the onset of many illnesses that develop through chronic tension and worrying, it allows us to clear our mind's focus and find creative solutions to problems. And next we have from writer Tricia Hershey. Treating each other and ourselves with care isn't a luxury, but an absolute necessity if we're going to thrive. Resting isn't an afterthought, but a basic part of being human. And again, to support you in these activities, we want to remind you that we have many resources here at OITE. Next slide. We have the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series, and next, Raising a Resilient Scientist. And this series that you have participated in today continues on May 22nd with the Epidemic of Loneliness. And we have a slide for that as well. So at May 22nd for the Epidemic of Loneliness. And just want to thank everybody and remind you that there's videos on the NIH OITE YouTube channel. Remind you also to please join us in May for our virtual career symposium, and that all of this information is available at www.training.nih.gov. And again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We'll have a few minutes for question and answer.
Yes, and Uli just reminded us of the Thriving Thursday next week, where people will have a chance to talk more about healthy rest and also explore healthy rest skills, how to incorporate healthy rest into more of a routine.
So in terms of questions, there's one that it says, what if you can easily sleep up to 12 and more hours on a regular basis? Like, how do you deal with that if you sleep that much?
I can start with that. So I think part of that might be knowing whether this is your usual pattern, if this is something that is related. Sometimes sleeping is also related to how we're feeling. So sometimes it's related to feeling avoidant or anxious or depressed. So we want to make sure that there isn't an underlying condition, physical or mental health wise, underlying the need to sleep for prolonged periods of time. And sometimes it also, a general practitioner might have us go through a sleep assessment. So after all of that is checked out, and we know that this is just our natural pattern, then I think there's some thought probably that's necessary in terms of planning the day around knowing what those sleep needs are and being very intentional and thoughtful about your schedule. But again, I would first go and make sure that, there isn't another reason that's underlying, especially if this is a change in your sleeping pattern.
And then there's another question. Do you have any tips for starting a new habit related to well-being? And I think the most important part on this question is making it stick.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think it's a process, but some of the things that we said prior about, first of all, thinking about what's realistic, and that could be anything from what's realistic in terms of your schedule and your time, what may be realistic in terms of finances, in case you're thinking about incorporating hobbies or activities that are costly, etc. So thinking about what's realistic for you, and that will likely, first of all, help you to sustain it, help it to become more habitual, the more realistic it is. So that's the first thought. And oh, Regina, were you going to say something? Sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah. And I think it can be trial and error, because I think the good thing is that there's so many ways, I think, to take healthy rest, as Regina said. And so I think it's okay if you try something and you don't like it. It doesn't mean that you forget about the whole goal, of incorporating more healthy rest or incorporating more of a practice. It can be trial and error, thinking about subjectively what feels best for me, what offers me that sense of relaxation and calm and renewal and restoration, because it may be different for different people.
So there's a question about, like somebody who's here on a visa and timeline, and they find it hard to not prioritize work over rest. So what advice would you be able to share to help incorporate more rest into a daily life?
So I think obviously time is such a huge constraint in our daily life, especially depending on how many stressors we have at the same time. I would say start by building in moments of rest, as we were talking about. So walking down the hallway can be your moment where you are taking deep breaths, where you are noticing the speed of your walk. Spending time outside, even if it means that it's not for as long as you would like it to be, but being in touch with nature is something that's very healing and restful. So how do I incorporate this? A mountain pose was something that we talked about doing when you're talking to someone. I think having the intention to put rest into your day is a wonderful way to start in terms of thinking about creating a plan. Just having that idea that you want this, you might be able to creatively find ways to rest, even when you find that it's between other activities, or it may not be as long as you wish it would be, but it's the start.
Yeah, I completely agree, Regina. I'll just give my own example. I think as we've been working on this presentation, I've been more primed about thinking about how I actually incorporate healthy rest. And the other day, I was literally at the water cooler talking to colleagues before I started my day, and it was a very busy day that I was anticipating, very busy work day. And I noticed that even after maybe 10 to 15 minutes of speaking with colleagues about something other than work, I noticed I felt differently. I felt a little bit more joyful in the start of my day. I think I felt a little bit more energized and motivated. So just another example of it doesn't have to be something that's completely out of the realm of your schedule. It can be something relatively small, something relatively brief, that can be incorporated into your day. That's healthy rest.
Thank you. There's another question about how do you start changing a lifestyle after a lifetime of being told to work all the time? So at this point, the person feels exhausted and doesn't have the energy to do anything healthy, even after a week of vacation. So it feels like almost there's a year in mountains to reset. But there's not that kind of option, obviously. So how would you approach that?
But, all big changes start with small changes.
Mhm.
So that's what we were talking about. Even just having the intention to bring this into your life, you'll find that just having that intention helps you orient yourself towards making space for it. And then you might find that there's a small step that you take in that direction, and then that feeds upon itself. So, it's overwhelming to be thinking about changing an entire lifetime, but it's a lot easier to think about today and what can I do today to spend 5 minutes on something that's not demanding from me mentally or emotionally in some way.
Yeah. And that may be where, we talked a little bit about vacation and how only using vacation to rest is certainly not necessarily indicated, because typically shortly after you return, you may feel the same way. But it may be that for someone who has an extended time of feeling exhausted or fatigued without rest, maybe, having a week or so of vacation where you're devoted to at least starting the practice, and then going from there might be helpful as well.
Thank you. Somebody tried hiking, painting, meditation, journaling, but everything feels actually more like work to them. And after working all day and all week, then there's just like no way that they want to do something else. They actually just want to do nothing. What do you
Yes.
say to that?
That is a form of passive rest.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, sitting, I think the key would be whatever you're doing when you're sitting doing nothing, does it help you feel better in the end? So in other words, there might be a difference that you feel from sitting and watching TV for hours versus sitting by a lake, sitting outside, or even if all you're doing is sitting there and looking at the lake, there's a lot of value to just being still.
And then our last question here is, when I take a week of vacation and don't keep up with email, and while they're out of office, they're overwhelmed and buried with email messages and requests. So they have to work overtime just to catch up. And it almost seems better to just keep working and not get so far behind. What are they doing wrong?
Do you want to start, Erica?
Oh, sure. I was going to say, I think that this is probably a common challenge, where it can be very tempting to work on vacation in order to manage the load upon return. But you might want to first start by thinking about, what are your supports at work? If there are projects going on at work while you're on vacation and you feel the need to engage in those projects, might there be someone who can take up what you may do while you're at work, while you're on vacation, so that you don't have to necessarily engage in work while on vacation? So support from colleagues. Sometimes people can think of sort of even a plan as to, once I return, I will, start to return emails a little at a time. So it's even a plan as to their return plan. So not coming back to work, starting kind of full speed ahead, but actually having a bit of a transition period upon return to work. So, clearing out the inbox, perhaps some days at a time, where you've devoted that time to transition back to work before you get back into the full swing of things. That's what comes to mind for me, Regina. I don't know if anything else comes to mind for you.
The importance of not only planning for annual vacations, but of building in rest daily and weekly, so that that and also the value of out of office messages, automatic replies.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking too is, as we talk about this, cultural change, right? How can we bring about a little bit of cultural change where people know that that rest also is important.
And we have one last question. What is the first step for someone who has a lot of trouble getting enough sleep each night?
So I think that one step would be contacting us at OITE, speaking to a wellness advisor, so we can really get into the details of, is it stress? Is it your schedule? Really start to think together about what are the underlying issues that are causing you not to sleep? Is it physical? Is it something that, you know, you need to see a doctor and just make sure that physically you're checked out, or that and we can also talk about recommendations for sleep and for sleep hygiene.
And oftentimes sleep can be, you know, I think maybe the first sign that you know, there could be other, apart from, you know, maybe physical issues going on, but psychological issues. You know, oftentimes our sleep is interrupted when we may be worried about something or anxious about something or unsettled about something. So just reiterating Regina's point that, you know, first talking to someone who can help you figure out what could be underlying the sleep concerns.
And then, yes, if you're not at the NIH and you look for resources at your institution, it might be that you have opportunities there that you can reach out to, or you know, like look at our YouTube channel. There are some resources there from OITE. And yes, I want to invite you to our Thriving Thursday in 2 weeks. Next week we have Postback Post today, so we can't offer it. So it's going to be on the 9th of May at noon. You all get an invitation via email, as well, with the recording of today and the slides from today. So thank you for joining us and spending your Wednesday afternoon with us. And we hope that you can use this very practical information to add a little bit of healthy rest to actually increase your productivity and well-being. And with that, we'll be signing off. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.